Hello there. Welcome back to the How to Play Blue Water Navy series of videos that I am making. If you've been following along, you know I tend to make some mistakes, and in this case, I am revising the sixth video because I made some mistakes and omissions in that video that were significant enough that I want to redo it. So I'm going to begin by replaying the first part of the log, and then I'm going to break into just actually playing it out, playing the turn out correctly. So what we have going on here, it is a Soviet action. The first mistake I need to correct is, it's an important one. The American carriers launched an airstrike previously and scored a single anti-ship missile hit against the Soviet task force, and they chose to allocate that hit to the amphibious units. Whenever an anti-ship missile strikes an amphibious unit, it scores 2 hits against it. That is that's just a rule, and that's an important thing because how many hits these amphibs have is going to matter later in the game. So that was an important omission. Normally, when a missile strikes a task force, there's a procedure to determine whether it does 1 hit or 2 hits worth of damage, or whether it hits a capital ship. Whenever the hit is allocated to an amphibious ship or a convoy, it scores 2 hits, period, end of story. Okay, so 2 hits on those convoys, which is better for NATO. So the Soviets are now going to try to get back at the Americans. The Americans' strike air units on the carriers are refitting, so if they can take a carrier down before they get up and running again, they might save themselves a problem in the future. And so they're going to send this Bear patrol aircraft from the Kola Peninsula. I did something funny there. Sorry, that's just some log clicking. You don't have to worry about that. They send this Bear patrol aircraft from the Kola Peninsula, and it enters the sea zone where there are fighters on combat air patrol. In the previous turn, the Task Force Ranger Tomcats flew to escort the strike package, and so they are spent. They could still conduct cap if need be, but they would be at a negative modifier. However, the Task Force Ranger F-14s are not spent, so they're going to fly out to fight cap. As previously discussed, when fighters do combat against maritime patrol aircraft, they roll their complement of dice -2. So the Tomcats are going to roll 2 dice with a +2 modifier, and the results they're going to get are 2 sevens. A result of a natural 10 against a maritime patrol aircraft kills it and sends it back to, or kills a step and sends it back to base without conducting a search at all. A result of a 9 removes a single search die from the aircraft's complement of search dice, and so 2 9s would remove 2, and you can modify that to 0. So this Bear patrol aircraft was interdicted by Tomcats and decided to get out of the area before it was shot down, but was not able to search with its single die and would not have been able to search even if it had 2 dice. So it's going to fly back to base and be spent, but for gameplay purposes, I'm going to pretend that it made a detection roll and was successful and upgraded the detection from poor to good, and I'm doing that to demonstrate this aspect of the game. Whenever a maritime patrol aircraft makes a detection attempt and that detection is successful, when it flies a mission to make a detection attempt and that detection is successful, that player can then immediately take another action as long as that action results in an attack against the just detected task force. The reason I say if it flies a detection mission is if the unit is on patrol in a sea zone and it successfully detects a task force that's coming into the sea zone, that does not give the detecting player an opportunity to immediately launch a strike. It's only if they send the aircraft out on patrol. I think I covered this in another video, but it's like, all right, we know there's some ships out there. We want to sink them. You get in your plane and go find those ships for us. And when you see them, call us and we're going to come out and sink it. Sort of like in the Battle of Midway, right, when the carriers were waiting to hear from their search aircraft where the enemy was so they could launch their planes. If the plane's just flying a general patrol, its side doesn't have a package of strike aircraft armed and ready to go just in case it finds something. Okay, I hope that distinction is clear. So we are pretending now that the detection was good, and the Soviets are going to now follow up. And the only way that they can make an attack against this task force now is with one of their submarines. And up here, in the North 7-8, they have a diesel sub, a Foxtrot, and that's a decent platform for killing surface ships. But a diesel submarine against a fast task force suffers a negative modifier that's pretty significant. So they're going to look at their nuclear submarine options. This is another diesel sub, this Whiskey. It can move one zone and attack. It can't move two zones. Here is a nuclear-powered Victor 1. It could run down there across the GI-UK gap and make its attack, but it's not nearly as good a sub as the Victor 3. And so here comes the Victor. And there it comes. Now, this is the place in the previous log that I made the most significant error. And this is an important thing. The reason that the U.S. is keeping their surface ships back here is because they're behind this SOSUS line, the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap area, right? And so when a submarine crosses that line, it allows the NATO player to do one of two things. First of all, I'll show you the lines. Okay, there's the line up here between the Arctic and Iceland, and then between Iceland and the UK, and then between the UK and Norway. There's another one here in the English Channel. This one is different. This one gives, this ASW unit indicates that there's an inherent patrol there that gets to attack the submarine. I'm not sure what scenario would involve the Soviets trying to sail one of their subs through the English Channel. I don't think that's likely, unless the war's going really well for them. So what happens when the sub crosses one of these SOSUS lines, which is more likely to happen during a game? The NATO player has two options. It has to have a fresh unit in the zone that is able to attack. If it does have a fresh unit, that unit can do one of two things. It can roll a single die on the anti-submarine warfare table against the unit entering the zone, adding its own tactical value against the fresh unit. So this British sub here, the Churchill, it could take a single die roll trying to score a hit on the Victor, and if it chooses that option, the submarine is not spent. It's still available for a future action. It may also roll a normal anti-submarine warfare attack against the unit entering the zone, and it's as if the fresh friendly unit was attacking it and only it. And it rolls one additional die when it does that, but it marks itself as spent. So it's the equivalent of this unit being on patrol and being able to respond, but because this SOSUS line is here, they get that special bonus. And so this Victor is probably the best submarine the Russians have in the game, and so rather than save this sub for later, the NATO player is going to go ahead and have the Churchill launch an attack against the Victor, and the attack is going to have an additional die, so it's going to get to roll 4 attack dice with a +1 modifier, as you see the tactical modifier, and it's going to hope that it sinks the Victor. There's a 1 and a 9 and a 2 and a 9, and so that is 2 modified 10s, which are high enough to hit this Victor and in fact kill it, because the Victor cannot save, right? The 10 defense is a good defense, but it's not circled, and so it doesn't get a saving throw. So the first hit damages it, and the second hit kills it. So there is word to the wise for the Soviet player. Crossing the GI-UK gap is risky. The Churchill is now spent, and so the Soviets spent their first op on the patrol aircraft and their second ops point on the submarine, and so now they are done. And now NATO has a turn. As I said earlier, there's a submarine up here, the Daphne. This is a diesel sub, and it's slow, but it has 4 dice. And it's got a good detection on the Soviet amphibs. And so NATO's going to go ahead and take a shot at that with the Daphne at the task force. And so when you go to your player aid and you look at submarines versus task forces, you see that there are some modifiers. If there's a good detection, the sub gets an additional dice. And so the Daphne is going to be rolling with 5. If this was a fast task force, a diesel sub would have a -2 modifier, but because the amphibs are in it and they are slow, it is not. So the Daphne is going to get 5 dice. The Soviets maybe would have been better off trying to get rid of the Daphne, right? Let's see what happens with the 5 dice. 3 and 2. What happens with the 5 dice is good for the NATO and not good for the Soviets. There's no tactical modifier, but that's still a natural 10, an 8, and a 9. A natural 10 is an opportunity to hit, possibly sink a capital ship. So we will talk about that if it comes to that. But the task force gets a save. And remember, this is a very solid, very strong task force that the Russians have here. So they have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 ASW points, plus 2 for the helicopter is 16 ASW points. So they're going to roll 4 dice in defense, hoping to eliminate the hits that the Daphne scored and possibly kill the Daphne. And look at that, quadruples. Okay, so with any double, the task force owner is allowed to alter the die, take 2 of those dice, turn one of them into an 8, and get rid of the other one. There's no reason for that here, because for each 8 plus, the task force owner may remove 1 submarine attack die of their choice. And so the Daphne had scored 3 hits, but the task force's defense protected it from all of them. So what that means, it's not like there were hits and then they bounced off, right? What it means is the Daphne got in close. It had a really good shot. It took the shot, but the task force, by whatever means necessary, defended itself in such a way that they were able to avoid taking any damage. They got some helicopters out to scare the Daphne away before it could really get its shot off the way it wanted to. That some individual ship captains did some deft maneuvering and got their ships out of the way of the torpedoes. Whatever happened, it was an opportunity for the Daphne to do some damage, but they weren't able to capitalize. And so that's good for the Soviets. And the Daphne is then spent. In case it doesn't happen, I want to talk about capital ships because that is something that is pretty relevant here. So let's go ahead and bring up this task force. The Minsk and the Kirov, they both have the letter B in a black circle. That indicates that they're capital ships. The other way that a capital ship is indicated is for instance, the American carrier, the Enterprise, has the letter H inside a black circle. Those stand for big and huge. They are size modifiers for capital ships. When a capital ship is hit, there is a table that you look at where you determine what happens. And I'm looking for it on the player aid. There is a capital ship damage procedure, and it is on the blue player aid on the side that says Task Forces Detection, blah, blah, blah. When a capital ship is hit, you look at the table to determine how many dice you need to roll. So, for instance, if it's a NATO missile or a Soviet white missile from a ship, or a Soviet red missile, or a Tomahawk missile through card play, then you roll a single dice. If it's a Soviet yellow, black, or submarine white missile, or a Soviet or NATO torpedo, you roll 2 dice. And if it's a Soviet torpedo from a Soviet sub marked with the red T, the heavy torpedo modifier, you roll 3 dice. If the capital ship is already damaged, you add a die. And if there's more than 1 hit at the same time, you add a die. And so you roll however many dice are indicated. And if the capital ship has a big modifier, any roll of 1 to 7 indicates damage. Any roll of 8 to 10 indicates sunk. If it's got the huge modifier, all dice rolled 1 to 9 indicate damage, and all dice rolled 10 indicate sunk. So any hit against a capital ship is going to damage it, but it could sink it. Okay? I hope that's clear. That didn't happen here. The Soviets saved the day for themselves. And the Daphne is spent, and we are now at a repair option, right? Whenever both sides operations counters are at or below an event, the event happens, and that triggers the repair. What happens is you remove a single point of damage from each damaged facility, and in this case, it reduces the amount of damage at the UK airfields to 0, so there is no further damage of any kind. All right, and now we have a Soviet action, and again, what the Soviets are looking at here is they've got good detection on this American task force, and they probably won't after the ship's action. So they don't have a lot of really solid units left, but they're going to give it their best shot. And so they're going to send their Victor 1, their nuclear submarine, through the Greenland, Iceland, UK SOSUS gap. Now, what you'll notice is NATO doesn't have any active units here available to respond, so the fact that it went through the gap is irrelevant. The Soviets probably should have sent this sub first and saved the Victor for a future attack. If I was better at playing the game, I would have probably thought of that. So here we go. So the Victor is coming with 2 attack dice. It gets a +1 die modifier for the fact that it's attacking a task force with good detection, and it suffers a -1 die modifier for the fact that it's a fast task force. So it rolls 2 dice. We'll see what happens here. The Victor rolls a 5 and a 6, and it does nothing. As we know from previous combats, the task force rolls 4 dice in defense of itself, and it modifies them by 1. No, negate that. It's a fast task force, so it goes up a column. So it's just rolling 4 dice. And so no modifier to the die rolls, but there is a 10 scored there, and the Victor has a 9 defense and is not allowed to save. So the Victor is damaged and also spent. And that brings the NATO operation points down to 3. And we're going to have a ship's action coming up, and so I'm going to do a separate video on the ship's action. I'm going to intentionally do something that I think is foolish for the NATO player to try on the ship's action, because then I'm going to demonstrate what happens when task forces end up in the same sea zone. It won't be good for NATO, in most likely, but it'll be fun to watch. All right, so that's this video. Wait, I'm sorry. Scratch all of that. That was a Soviet action. There we go. That was a Soviet action. NATO hasn't acted and spent its op yet. Here we go. NATO's got an op. And what NATO's going to do is launch a maritime patrol aircraft from UK airfield now that it's repaired. And they're going to go up here and try to sink this Foxtrot. They get 3 dice to do that. Let's see what they get. A 3, an 8, and a 9. Those are pretty good rolls there. And in fact, the 9 is enough to do damage. And so it flips. There is something, one of the things I missed on the last log that doesn't apply here is there is a special rule about maritime patrol aircraft attacking a certain kind of submarine, and I don't think any of the subs that I currently have in the game have this, but there's a type of submarine that has what's called a non-magnetic alloy hull, and it has a modifier on the submarine that says N, and when a maritime patrol aircraft is attacking one of those subs, it needs a natural 10 to sink it, and that's all. It's the only way it can sink it. So that was the thing I missed. So now, finally, yes, that unit goes back. It's spent. The next video will be a ship's action. That will be a lot of fun. But this is the video for now. Hope I got it right.